Welcome back to the channel. This is Wayne's World RC. Today's build is going to be an upgrade on the C hub carriers and the hub carriers of the laser nut. Back again, doing more upgrades as usual. What our first step is today is you want to take off the tires, get them all dismounted from the vehicle. Then you want to take off the hub nuts and the pins. Make sure you put them aside so you don't lose them. And now what we want to do is disassemble the rear hubs. We'll start there because the rear hubs are a lot easier to take apart than the front hubs. So let's dismount the rear left. Take it away. We're going to take the tie rod end off first. Then we're going to put that aside. Now, I have aluminum hubs now, which is pretty cool. We're going to upgrade that because I hear a lot of times that it does break. And I don't want to be out bashing and have to come home because the hub carrier is broke. Next thing we're going to do is going to release the rear pin that holds on the hub carriers. Now we're going to disassemble it from the vehicle. Now, you want to push your pin out. Make sure your bearings are still good. I like to, spray them. To each his own. I like to put a little silicone on there. Make sure that there's no dirt and grime. Let it sit in for a while. Rub it back and forth. Now what we want to do is release the other bearing from the hub carrier. Don't pound it too much. You can put it down on something and just take your wheel carrier and give it a quick tap and it'll fall out. Like the other bearing that we had. We want to clean it off. Spray it a little bit. The reason why I spray it too is it will help me put it back in the carrier. So now we want to put the right bearings in the right spot in the carrier. Make sure they turn. Now you want to put the assembly back through. Your CV shaft back through and make sure that you push the nut in there so that you hear it pop. Once you see it pop, then you can try it a little bit in your hub carrier. And you notice that it's freely doing good. It's not binding or anything. Now you want to put your CV shaft back in. Your axle pin back through your hub carrier. Making sure that the CV shaft is in the outdrive. Now, what we'll do is we'll put the nut back on the hub carrier pin. Get our wrenches back. Make sure that's tight. Actually, being that it's really loose, as we can see, we'll have to disassemble it. There's a part that's in there, and we'll figure it out. Right here, it's shims. We can see in the original, they actually have shims built in. So what we're gonna do, because we don't want it sloppy, is we're gonna get out some washers to make sure that that's not floating too much, because if it floats too much, then what's going to happen is you're going to find it's probably going to break, and that's not going to be good. So what we'll do is we'll start with 2 So you'll lift your hub mount out of the way, put your two washers in. It's kind of tricky, I guess you could say, because you got to find the right washers. Or another way you could do it is there's bushings you can use. I think this time I'm going to use some clear bushings that I have, which are just rubber gaskets, because I need to make sure that there's not a lot of play in that back wheel, because we don't want it to be sloppy, or when you're driving your vehicle you want it to be, you know, you want the rear wheels and stuff to be tight, because, and the hub to be kind of tight, because if it's not, then you take a good chance of breaking more parts. And I know that's the fun of bashing, is to put it back together and stuff. But I don't suggest, you know, not putting it perfect back together. I do your best. So I'll put, it looks like 2 rubber O-rings in the rear. It looks like we only need 2 rubber O-rings. So what we're going to do is put 1 in. Then we're going to put the bolt through the hub carrier. Line it up. It is a little bit tricky, but it's not. Then what we'll do is we'll get another O-ring, and we'll put it on the other side. Push our pin through once we get it aligned, and now you see there's no play, and we're good to go there. Now we'll put the nut back on. Using our wrenches that were provided for us, and if you have another .5 millimeter wrench to help tighten it. Make sure it's not loose. Make sure your CV shaft is in your CV drive or out drive. Now you can refasten your hub carrier, or your tie rod. And I'm going to go back with the original inward position. Line it up. I'm going to put a washer, and then I'm going to put my nylon nut back on my screw. Get it started. Then you're going to use your 2 millimeter and your 5 millimeter. Tighten that up quite a bit. You don't want a lot of slop and play, again, because eventually could create breaking tie rods and stuff. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to put our pin through our axle, or CV shaft. Now it's really tiny, so you probably should use some needle nose or something, or whatever you have, because that way you don't lose it and you can hang on to it. Put it in the hole that's provided. Now you want to put your hub nut back on. Make sure that you can see that it's in there. Make sure that it's tight. Now we'll put our tire back on. That way we assure that that locking pin and that nut don't come out. Now, for the best purposes, you want to make sure that that tire locks in place, because if it doesn't, then you can take a chance of stripping out. You'll strip out that hub, and it's very common for these because there's not a lot of meat on the hub. Just make sure that nut is on there really tight. You don't want a lot of slop or play, as you can see, which we don't. Now that we've assembled the right side rear hub, now we'll turn over to the other side rear hub, and we're going to repeat the step we did before. We'll take off the tie rod. Put the tie rod aside. Now we'll have to take off the hub carrier nuts. Which won't take long. Pull out the pin. Take out CV shaft. Remove the bearings gently. The inside's usually bigger and easier. Just make sure you don't damage them because they're rubber sealed bearings that we need. Before, like I did, I'm going to release the bearing as much as I can. There we go. Now we'll set the two rear hub carriers aside. We'll put the bearings, make sure they're clean, sprayed, put them back in the carriers. Make sure they pop in place nicely and they turn freely. You can hear that pop. Now what we want to do is get our bushings, which I said before, we're going to use the rubber O-rings that I have. In my toolkit. Once you put one side of the hub carrier through, put your O-ring. Now you put your CV shaft in through the bearing. It's easier to do it now. And then you put your CV shaft into your outdrive of your differential. Make sure you got that O-ring in there. Put it part way in. Now you put your pin part way through your hub carrier. Get your other O-ring. If it's easier, use pliers. But usually you can line it up once you start one. Then you can poke it through. Just make sure you don't destroy that O-ring. Once you get your nut through, now you put your bolts back on. Make sure this is really tight because you don't want your CVD shaft to fall out. But make sure it's not too tight either, because you don't want to break the A-arm. Once that's in place, your CVD shaft's in place, now you take your tie rod, put your bolt through. Make sure it's the same hole as you used on the other side. Put your nut back on. Your nylon locking nut. Start it straight. Once you start it, you can use your wrenches, tighten it up. Now that that's tight, now what we're going to do is put our pin in place and a hub nut. Once you put your hub nut on, make sure that it's not spinning. That means the pin is in there pretty good. You can see there's no play. Now you take your rear tire and place it in your CVD shaft. Make sure that hub nut, there you go, it's over the top of the hub nut, because what you definitely don't want to strip out your hover tire. Make sure that's really tight. You don't want any play. Okay, now we'll move to the front. First thing we want to do is to remove the nut, hub nut, remove the pin. Make sure you be careful not to lose the pin. Now we want to release the tie rods like we did before. The reason why we did this second, because the front is going to take a little bit more time than the rear. If you have your hub carrier, just make sure R is on the right side, looking from the back to the front of the vehicle. Now you want to remove one tie rod. Now, what we want to do, it's easier now, is we want to remove the front, which is a bigger nut or screw. It's a 2.5 in the front. You want to release that screw. Now we want to release the rear screw. As you can see, is in the back of the hub carrier. Once we release that, we'll put that aside. Pull the carrier out, pull the CV shaft out of the assembly. Now you can see it's just a screw, and it's the 2.0, I want to say. Just gotta unscrew it. As we see, It came with its own pins. Now what we want to do is release the bearing from the old C-hub carrier. Do it gently, go around in a circle, and then it'll come out. Now we want to get the front out. Try not to damage it because they're hard to find, but not too hard. We want to clean them off, spray them, set them there. Now it's probably easier to put the new hub carrier in place. Put our bolts back in. This time I'm gonna put a blue thread locker on it. I'm gonna drip a little bit on a towel and put it in. You'll feel when it starts to go in. Now, since it's easier for me, I'm gonna put more thread locker on and go to the other side, the reverse side of the carrier, and start my screw in. Now we'll tighten this down. Remember that's a 2.5 in the front. Now we'll tighten the back. As you see. Now we'll put our top. We'll get our CV shaft. Put our bearings in place that we spray. Snap them in place. The front, the rear, and the front. Put our CV shaft through first. Make sure that it's tight in there. Now we'll move our sway bar link out of the way a little bit. Whoops, we'll put our CV shaft in first, I see. Trial and error. Now we'll take in put our, well, before we put our hub carrier, I guess we have to find a way to well, I guess we're gonna have to do it a different way. We'll take our hub carrier out first. We'll release that. Trial and error. I learned the hard way. This is why I create the channel, because it's not just me learning, it's us working together. I'll take the hub axle hub bolts out. We'll put the CV shaft first through. Put it through the carrier. Now we'll put our screws back in to our C-hub. Line our C-hub up. Make sure that it's lined up, both of them. And we'll start our other screw in place.